please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Ruffridge,
Here.
Nelson,
Present.
Carey,
Present.
Chilson,
Present.
Parker, Hutchings.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda?
I will make a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you both. Are there any changes to the agenda or consent agenda? Would the clerk please read the consent agenda?
Approval of minutes, May 25th, 2022, council meeting minutes. New business, ordinances for introduction, ordinance 2022-017, amending Soldotna Municipal Code, Chapter 2.48, disposition of surplus city property to update the procedures for disposal of city property, introduced by the city manager, public hearing scheduled for June 22nd, 2022. Resolutions, Resolution 2022-025, ratifying a collective bargaining agreement with the Public Safety Employees Association for a term ending June 30th, 2025, introduced by the city manager. Other new business items, Action Memorandum 2022-014, a 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission appointment for Sonia F. Barbaza, Seat A, term ending December 31st, 2022, introduced by the mayor. And that is your consent agenda.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one here in the council wishing to speak on it, and I see no hands raised on Zoom. Hearing no one wishing to speak, the approval of the agenda and consent agenda is back before the council. Are there any council objections to the agenda and consent agenda? Seeing none, the agenda and consent agenda are approved by unanimous consent. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is I have a proclamation here I would like to read and present to, whereas Kathy Gensel is the director of Central Peninsula Health Foundation for Central Peninsula Hospital, and whereas during her 42 years on the Kenai Peninsula, Kathy has always volunteered in some capacity to serve her child's and now grandchildren's school and church, as well as Soldotna in the state of Alaska. And whereas Kathy is a founding member and president of Bridges Community Resource Network Incorporated, whose mission is to provide access to resources supporting emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And whereas Kathy has been actively engaged in Project Homeless Connect, shelter development work groups, and has worked to bring awareness to the Kenai Peninsula on the issues of homelessness and housing insecurity. And whereas Kathy regularly works with the city of Soldotna to keep the council and administration informed of issues and activities affecting residents who are homeless or experiencing housing instability. And whereas Kathy co-chairs the annual Homeless Connect event, providing resources, supplies, and support to the homeless population. And whereas, with Kathy's guidance, the Help the Homeless Fund was partnered with the Kenai Peninsula Foundation to support the Kenai Peninsula Homeless Coalition in completing their 5-year strategic plan, which led directly to their ability to acquire and open the Nikiski Shelter of Hope. And whereas Kathy regularly mentors beginner, nonprofit, and community interest groups to reach their fullest potential, and whereas Kathy was recognized by First Lady Rose Donlevy with the First Lady's Volunteer of the Year Award on May 17th, 2022. And whereas Kathy is exceptionally committed to Soldotna in the Kenai Peninsula and state of Alaska, now therefore I, Paul Whitney, Mayor of the City of Soldotna, on behalf of the City Council and the citizens of Soldotna, do hereby recognize the outstanding volunteerism by this dedicated City of Soldotna, Kathy Gensel. And I commend and thank Kathy for her years of caring, compassion, and selfless service to our community. Dated this 8th day of June 2022. I'll get it right yet. You're the one that does it. We just sit back.
I know I need to go home and take a nap now.
Go back and enjoy the sun.
Thank you so much. Good idea.
Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is public comments and presentations other than those appearing on the agenda. 3 minutes per speaker, 20 minutes aggregate. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Seeing no one here in the chambers, and seeing no one on Zoom, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. Assembly and legislative reports. Are there any representatives from the borough or the state in attendance who would like to speak? I do see someone from Senator Murkowski's office on the line. So for those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one here in the chambers, and does Senator Murkowski's office wish to add anything? I see nothing. No hand raised, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, number 6, administrative reports. Quarterly financial and investment reports. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. This is a bit of a trial for us. This is the quarterly investment earnings reports and the quarterly sales tax data that Melanie Imholt, our finance director, emails to the council, and I invited her to attend the council meeting tonight and present it as part of one of your normal agenda items so that she could be available to ask questions if there are any. And then we'd be open to feedback from the council and you, Mr. Mayor, about whether this is something that you'd prefer that she do moving forward in person. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melanie.
Thank you. This is, like Stephanie said, something that you guys have seen, same format. I think it's important
Could
to
you
point-
pull the microphone down closer?
I think
Thank
it's
you.
important to point out that this is on a cash basis for the most part. So there's some things in here that, you know, if you compare where we're at year to date now versus where we're at year to date last year, there may be some fluctuations between revenues and expenditures just due to timing of when cash came in the door or when cash went out the door. There are some other things in here that look a little bit strange, and one of the things is this report is through March 31st, and while it's through March 31st, the sales tax for the quarter ended March 31st. Most of those payments are not going to be included in here. We don't receive that revenue from the borough until about the middle to the end of May. Also, investments that we record throughout the year, interest and dividends earned on our investments, as well as realized gains and losses. But as you know, we're required at the end of the year on June 30th to mark to market is what they call it. So we have to adjust our balance to what the actual market value of the investments are at that time on that date. And that market value adjustment doesn't happen except for one time a year at year end. So that will not be included in there. Also included in this packet is the quarterly investment report that comes from Alaska Permanent Capital Management. And you'll notice in there that there are some that we are down a lot from where we were last year. We did talk about this briefly in the budget meeting. This is something that it was kind of expected. We knew it was kind of coming, and we expect in the future it's going to kind of normalize, but for right now we are down. If it doesn't recover by the end of the year, that is one of those market value adjustments we'll have to make at the end of the year. That all runs through revenue. So like last year where we had an unprecedented huge gain, unrealized gain that we ran through revenue. This year there could be a big loss, which would result in a negative interest revenue, basically. The other thing I think that's worth pointing out is the sales tax update. We have received the data from the borough now for the quarter. We are up year to date for the first 3 quarters of the year. We're up about 10.6% compared to the same time frame in 2021 or FY21. Quarterly taxable sales are up about 0.79%. If you look at gross sales, they're up about, yearly gross sales are up about 19.9%, and quarterly gross sales are up about 1.22%. And I guess back to investments, you know, I was talking with our investment advisors, and they did mention that rising inflation, slower economic growth, unforeseen events in Ukraine, and the prospects of the Federal Reserve tightening monetary policy is what's contributed to this, and that they will start normalizing soon. They also said that these returns are well within the modeling expectations of the investment plan and have not derailed any of our goals. So, if there's any questions?
Any questions from the council? Mr. Carey?
I want to start off by saying how much I appreciate that we get to see you,
Thank you.
okay? And I can appreciate that it may be a little bit, may make you a little bit anxious in terms of appearing for us, but again, the more you do it, again, we're a pretty friendly group, and you have good
Yes, you
information. I have two questions. The first, how are we doing in terms of the sales tax coming from online? So again, could you give me some idea of where we're at, again, for that first quarter of this year, January, February, March, as compared to the previous year?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I can certainly get back to you with them.
Could you make an estimate, though, that they're up?
They are definitely up, yes. We projected 250,000, I think, for this year, and we've already come back to council appropriating more money for the fees related to it, because we're now anticipating probably 425 to 450,000. So yes, they are definitely up.
So just in following that, and I kind of knew you were going to say that, at least I thought so. You know, there's quite a bit of discussion over the years in terms of the online would take so much money away from us. Did I also hear you say that the first quarter of this calendar year, as compared to the previous year, our sales tax revenue for that period is also up?
Year to date, we're up 10.6%, and for the quarter, we're up 0.79%.
So let me just ask you, in terms of, you're the expert much more than I am. We've got more money going from online, and yet we're still up 10%. What's the wonderful thing that must be going on that we're making so much more money? Why are so many more people, why is so much more money being spent on things that we get to charge sales tax on this year as compared to, again, a year ago? Is it the end of COVID? Any guesstimation you might make on why we're doing so well?
I don't know. Stephanie, what do you think?
Go buy a tank
Soldotna's
of
a
gas
great
and you'll
place to
find
be, and
out.
all these improvements that we're making, they're really paying off.
Yeah, I would just add, you know, the growth in online sales tax revenue is in part because they're still continuing to add sellers into that system. So we're still bringing new businesses into that system where they're charging tax for the first time. And ironically, Wayfair just recently signed up, even though they were the landmark Supreme Court case that allowed us to do that. So that growth, I think, is related to capturing more of the existing market in terms of sellers that are now submitting returns. The growth in our brick and mortar sales has been strong the last couple of years, outpacing what we'd seen historically. And that causes us a bit of discomfort because we don't want to project that that's a trend that's going to continue. But I will say that it is the case that our neighbors are experiencing similar growth. So we sure do a lot in Soldotna to try and attract business here and attract visitors. But there have been in the other municipalities in the borough, they've seen similar rates of increases in brick and mortar sales recently, and it's just something that we don't understand, but we will just keep a close eye on.
Good. And just the last thing, you know, our last report from Chamber of Commerce said that it looks like it's going to be a very good tourist season as well, which would be more income. And thank you for all the good work you do.
Oh, thank you.
You're most welcome.
You as well.
Mr. Ruffridge?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll echo what Mr. Carey said. I just really appreciate the work that you do. I think it's very difficult sometimes to have that level of detail all the time at your fingertips, ready to go, and you've just done it for such a long time, and I think it's a real blessing for this city to have somebody like yourself taking care of these in such a very intricate but very accessible way, and I really appreciate what you do with that. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Hutchings?
Well, I'd like to thank you as well, Melanie. I really, really appreciate the work you do. And I just do want to say one thing about the additional tax that we seem to be collecting. I do two kinds of shopping online, some for our business, which of course is tax exempt because it's for resale, but also when I go and I buy a pair of shoes or a pair of slacks, because it's something I can't get locally, more and more of those companies are charging sales tax. So I'm excited. I know where it's going. And so I don't feel quite as guilty shopping online.
Vice Mayor Parker.
I would echo all the comments from the other council members. And since coming from where I live, I have to turn left onto the Sterling Highway to get here, or just turn left. I can tell you there is a lot more traffic. And it's not because we're moving into summer, we're seeing it on a year-round basis, but the increase in traffic that we're seeing now, particularly in April and May, which used to be kind of, latter part of June and July, we're seeing it on a constant basis. So sometimes I have to go right, turn left, and then go right again to get into the city. So thank you, Melanie.
And I thank you also. I think this is a very good report, and I enjoy seeing it on a quarterly basis or however often we're going to do it. Brings a lot of good information and gets a lot of good information out to the public. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Moving on to the next item on the agenda is number 7, public hearings. Ordinance 2022-016, amending the operating budget for fiscal year 2023 by adoption of the mid-biennium update to the fiscal year 2022 and 2023 biennial operating budget, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact?
So move to enact ordinance 2022-016, an ordinance amending the operating budget for the fiscal year 2023 by adoption of the biennium update to the fiscal year 2022 and 2023 biennial operating budget.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffridge. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Ms. Imholt and I had the opportunity to present this budget and the details of the proposed changes to year 2 of the biennial budget at a recent work session, and we went into detail on all of those changes. They're described in the management letter at the front of the budget that Melanie and I produced, which details all of those changes. We don't have a presentation for you tonight, as we've already gone through that, but we both would be happy to answer any questions you might have, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. The public hearing is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one here in the chamber, and looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised. So it's back before the council. Are there any council comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the roll.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Carey?
Yes?
Chilson?
Yes.
Parker? Yes. Hutchings?
Yes.
Ruffridge?
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Thank you. Ordinance 2022-016 passed on a 6-0 vote. Moving on to agenda item 8, new business. Everything there was under the consent agenda, so we will move on to item 9, mayor and council reports. I'll keep it brief this evening. The work session we just had at 4:30 on the field house was very good, excellent. Appreciate all the work that the administration did on putting together that packet for us to go through. I'm looking forward to seeing an ordinance come forth to present it on to the council for scheduling a bond vote in October. And I have one other thing, or make it 2 other things. Having lived down here on the peninsula now for, I think, 34 years and being in Alaska for 47 years, this has got to be the best spring I've ever seen down here on the peninsula. This spring has been so good, it's even better than any summer I've ever seen down here. This is something that normally I'd see in Fairbanks when I lived there, but this has been just great. I don't know who was in charge of weather this year, but job well done. So last thing I have is the proclamation. Whereas Charlene Tautfest volunteers extensively for organizations in Soldotna, the Kenai Peninsula Borough, and the state of Alaska. And whereas Charlene serves on the Soldotna Planning and Zoning Commission, Soldotna Airport Commission, and Kenai Peninsula Borough Planning Commission as the Soldotna City seat. And whereas Charlene has held leadership roles in the Alaska Mental Health Board as chair, the Peninsula Community Health Service as president, and the Alaska Primary Care Association Policy and Advocacy Committee as chair. And whereas Charlene serves on the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education, Alaska Coalition of Housing and Homelessness, Alaska Psychiatric Institute Governing Board, and Alaska Primary Care Association Board. And whereas Charlene is the Soldotna Rotary Club president and has focused on children with Rotary Cares for Kids, organizing donations of birthday bags to the local food bank, and expanding the program by bringing it to other local organizations to get monthly birthday bags donated to the food bank. And whereas Charlene was recognized by First Lady Rose Dunleavy with the First Lady's Volunteer of the Year Award on May 17th, 2022. And whereas Charlene is exceptionally committed to Soldotna, the Kenai Peninsula, and the state of Alaska. Now therefore, I, Paul Whitney, Mayor of the City of Soldotna, on behalf of the City Council and the citizens of Soldotna, do hereby recognize the outstanding volunteerism by this dedicated citizens of Soldotna. Charlene taught fast, and I commend and thank Charlene for her years of selfless service to the citizens of Soldotna, Kenai Peninsula Borough, and state of Alaska. Dated this 8th day of June 2022. Charlene was unable to make it to the meeting tonight, so I will either, hopefully she can either make it to our next meeting or I will attend the next Planning and Zoning Commission and present it to her. So moving on to the next item on the agenda. And that will be council reports on boards and commissions. Soldotna Planning and Zoning Commission, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. So the Soldotna P&Z met last week on the 1st. A brief agenda with two main items. They discussed the capital improvement plan and was able to get some input there. That was a good discussion. Certainly the field house that we talked about earlier came up and was a subject of interest, and a few other items were discussed as it relates to putting together that capital improvement plan and the process. So certainly was pleased to be part of that and had some great feedback from our commissioners. The only agenda item that they discussed was a recommendation for a street renaming. There was a proposal received to rename Kenai Avenue. The Planning and Zoning Commission did not recommend to go forward with that, and was consistent with the public comment and requests of the public on that. So those were the two items. A fairly brief meeting, but very productive.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Any questions from the council for Mr. Nelson? I'm seeing none. We'll move on to the next agenda item is number 10, City Manager's Report, and a report from the City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I admit I spent today preparing for the work session and did not prepare a report, so if you emailed me and haven't heard back, I will get to that first thing in the morning. But I'm available to provide updates, as is Mr. Cornelis or Ms. Imhold, if there's any questions about projects. And I'll scan my calendar and send an email with any updates of meetings that we've recently had or other items of interest. Thank you.
Any questions or comments for the City Manager? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is number 11, public comments. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Seeing no one here in the council chambers wishing to speak, and looking at the Zoom, I see no hands raised. So we will move on to agenda item 12, council comments. Mr. Ruffridge.
No comments, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Ms. Hutchings.
Well, I would just like to say that I think we're all enjoying our summer since we had such a nice long winter. So I noticed the city has their flowers out. The park was full last week, I believe, 2,500 people at the park. So we'll see how many come today. They have been parking everywhere. And I'm excited about the field house. Let's get it done.
Thank you. Mr. Chilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. great work session this afternoon. Very excited to see where this project can go. Thank you to all the staff efforts that went into making that happen. Additionally, it's just been great to see all the activities back in our park again and just kicking off for an amazing summer and spring season, like you mentioned. You touched on it on our last meeting regarding the plastic bags and our ordinance that prohibits those in the stores. Just getting out there and running the trails and biking, I'm seeing a lot more plastic waste along the pathways, and I feel like we kind of extended a little bit of grace to the stores in our area during COVID because of supply chain issues. And again, I would just echo the comments that you made during the last meeting that I'd like administration to look into maybe reaching out to stores if possible and just reminding them that they need to be trying to do paper bags if at all possible. So thank you.
I'm just going to add something to what you just said on those plastic bags. One business is in town that was mentioned is using a heavier bag, which is permitted. The other business that I saw that had a lot of plastic bags were the same old style, very lightweight, and the ones that kind of blow all over the place. So we'll move on to Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and the presentation that we had, the work session was very good, and many of the senior citizens and the elders of our community sure hope that everyone will support this field house. It'll provide many, many opportunities for them that don't exist or exist only in a limited way. And I was also very pleased during the work session to hear about the use of what would count as daycare by the field house. And so that the idea that this new project that we're talking about that's very much needed is going to appeal certainly to those of us who are elder, as well as is going to very much assist those family people who need some assistance in terms of a place for a daycare. And so I sure hope this moves forward and our community as a whole will support the elders and the youngers in this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments. I did go and drive around Centennial and also walk around Centennial Park and saw all the trees that were taken down and the additional trees that still need to be taken down. Saw the same over at the cemetery today. So there has been a lot of hazard trees removed, but we know there's still a lot to come down. So thank you to Kyle and the contractors for the great work that they've been doing. The other thing that I've noticed around town is there's lots of construction and there's lots of projects going on. There's the care facility that's going next to Walgreens, and Kindle's now starting to work and clean up that site. So that's moving forward, and other construction projects. So things are busy in the city, and it's a happening place. With regard to the field house is something I support. I think it's going to be very important for the kids in our community. And when I say community, I'm counting the 37,000 people that live here in the Central Peninsula, because they are part of our community. So hopefully when this goes forward for a city vote in October, if that is the case, we're able to continue to move forward with the field house. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is item 13, executive session, which there is no. No, I forgot Mr. Nelson. I apologize for that.
No problem, and no comments tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to number 13, executive sessions. There is no need for one. Item 14, meeting announcements. June 16th, 2022, Airport Commission meeting, 5:30 p.m. And June 22nd, 2022, the City Council meeting here at 6 p.m. Seeing nothing else on our agenda, our meeting is adjourned.